My name is Renata, and I was 33 years old the morning my mother called to tell me she'd given my plus one to my sister's future aunt-in-law because, and I'm quoting directly here, it's politics, you know how it is. That was the whole explanation. Politics. Like I was a minor scheduling conflict, and not the person who had spent the previous 11 months managing every vendor, every deposit, every line item for a wedding I was now being quietly shuffled to the edge of. I didn't argue. I said, "Okay, Mom," and I hung up. My dad called 4 minutes later and added, "Just be gracious about it, Renata. This is your sister's day." And I said, "Of course." Because I was gracious. I have always been gracious. What my parents didn't know, what nobody in that family knew, was that gracious has a paper trail. And mine was 63 pages long. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened when the wedding planner opened that ledger in a room full of people who had spent a year treating me like a footnote. Stay with me. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If you're new here, hit subscribe. We post every week, and if you've ever been the one holding everything together while your family hands your chair to someone else, drop a comment. I read every single one. I want to start somewhere most people skip, because if you don't understand where I came from, the ending won't make sense. Not the satisfying kind of sense, anyway. I grew up in a medium-sized city in central Ohio called Morrow Falls, not a place anyone has heard of unless they've driven through it on the way to somewhere else. My parents, Glenn and Patrice, were practical people in the way that a lot of Midwestern parents are practical. They worked steadily, they paid their bills on time, they believed that loudness was a character flaw, and that family loyalty was the highest virtue. Those weren't bad values. I want to be clear about that. The problem was the way they applied them, which was unevenly, and almost always in the direction of my younger sister, Claudia. Claudia is 3 years younger than me and beautiful in the way that makes rooms quiet when she walks in.
She's not unkind, exactly.
She's just never been required to be particularly considerate, because the people around her have always rushed to smooth whatever surface she was about to walk across. My parents did it, her friends did it, and I did it for a long time because that was the role I'd grown into so gradually I didn't even notice the shape of it until I was already inside. I was the capable one, the organized one, the one who read the fine print and kept the folder and remembered what everyone else forgot. When my parents refinanced their house in 2019, I was the one who sat at the kitchen table for 3 Saturdays in a row and read every page of the loan documents before they signed. When my dad had a billing dispute with his orthopedic surgeon's office after a knee surgery, I was the one who called the insurance company, requested the itemized explanation of benefits, and wrote the appeal letter that eventually got the claim adjusted. I didn't do these things because anyone asked me to. I did them because I was good at them, and because in our family, competence was its own assignment. If you could handle something, it landed in your lap. My occupation is contract compliance analyst for a regional supply chain firm. I know that sounds dry. It is dry. But what it means practically is that I have spent 9 years reading contracts the way other people read novels, tracking the clauses, noting the obligations, understanding exactly who holds the leverage and where. I catch the things other people miss. That skill set does not turn off when I go home. I should tell you about my Aunt Dorothea, because she matters enormously to this story. Aunt Dorothea was my father's older sister, a retired county clerk who had worked in the local government offices for 31 years and who had, over the course of that career, developed an almost reverential attitude toward documentation. She used to say, "A piece of paper is the only thing that doesn't change its story based on who's in the room." She said it so often it became a kind of family joke, the way certain phrases become jokes, not because they're funny, but because repetition makes people comfortable with something that might otherwise feel too pointed. Dorothea was the one person in my extended family who treated me like an adult with a full interior life and not just the reliable older daughter who could be counted on to handle logistics. She came to my college graduation when my parents skipped it because Claudia had a dance recital that day. She sent me a card on my work anniversary every year, not my birthday, my work anniversary, because she said the day you commit to something serious deserves to be marked. When I got my professional certification in contract law compliance, she framed the certificate and mailed it back to me with a note that said, "Now, they can't say you don't have the paper." She passed away in the spring, 14 months before Claudia's wedding. She left me, among other things, a modest savings account I had not known existed, $41,000, with a handwritten note attached to the transfer documents that said simply, "For when your judgment matters most, don't let them spend it on anything foolish." I put it in a separate account. I did not tell my parents about it. Not because I was hiding it, but because it felt like something private, like a letter you keep folded in a drawer. Her words were still in my head, "For when your judgment matters most." I held on to that. Claudia got engaged in early autumn, about 8 months after Dorothea passed. The man's name is Preston, and he comes from a family in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a very clear sense of their own social coordinates. His parents, Roland and Miriam, own 2 commercial properties and a landscaping company that operates across 4 counties. They are not ostentatious people, but they are the kind of people who notice things, the right things, in their estimation. Which caterer, which venue, which florist, whether the tablecloths are linen or polyester, whether the event looks like it was assembled with care or assembled on a budget. These are the things that mattered to Miriam especially, who had the quiet, assessing manner of someone who has been evaluating rooms and the people in them for decades. My parents understood this, or they understood it in the way people understand a social pressure they can feel but not exactly name. They wanted the wedding to look a certain way. They wanted Roland and Miriam to come away with the impression that Claudia's family was, the word my mother used more than once, substantial. Which is a word that tells you something, because substantial is not the same as good or loving or close. Substantial is about how things look from the outside. The budget conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' kitchen table, about 6 weeks after the engagement. Claudia and Preston were there. I was there. My mother had written a number on a notepad and slid it across the table, like we were negotiating. The number was $22,000, what my parents could contribute without financial strain. It was a real number, and a generous one for their circumstances, and I want to be honest that they meant it sincerely. But $22,000 for the wedding Claudia had been describing, the specific venue she wanted, which was a restored historic estate called Harlow Hall about 40 minutes outside the city, the florist she'd already contacted, the caterer Miriam had quietly suggested, that number was not going to reach. I knew it because I'd already looked up the venue's published pricing out of habit. Harlow Hall alone started at $38,000 for a Saturday evening booking, inclusive of the site fee, the in-house coordinator, and basic setup. That was before a single flower or a single appetizer. I didn't say anything at the table. I went home, opened a spreadsheet, and spent about 4 hours modeling the actual cost of the wedding Claudia wanted. By the end of the evening, I had a working estimate, $60,000 to $68,000, depending on choices. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Dorothea's note. For when your judgment matters most. I called my mother the next morning. "I want to help fund the wedding," I said. "I have savings I can use. I'd like to cover the gap between what you can contribute and what the actual vendors will cost." There was a pause. "That's very generous, Renata," my mother said, in the tone she uses when she's recalibrating. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," I said. "But I'd like to handle the contracts directly. I'll coordinate with the vendors. It's what I do for work, and it'll be more efficient." Another pause. "We can talk about the logistics." We talked. And I want to be precise about what was agreed, because the precision matters later. My parents would handle the invitations and the guest list, the rehearsal dinner, and any day of coordination decisions. I would handle the vendor contracts, venue, catering, florals, photography, and the string quartet for the ceremony. Every contract would be in my name because I was the one wiring the deposits for my account. My mother said that was fine. My father said that was practical. Claudia said, "You're seriously the best, Rennie," and hugged me in the kitchen. Over the following 9 months, I built a master ledger. It was a Google sheet with linked tabs, one per vendor, with columns for the contract date, deposit paid, balance due, payment schedule, cancellation policy, and the name and direct line of the contact person. $41,000 from Dorothea's account, supplemented by $22,000 from my parents transferred to me, meant I was managing $63,000 in commitments. Not a single vendor in that ledger had a contract with anyone but me. That was not a secret. It was simply the practical outcome of the arrangement we had agreed to. I was the one with the accounts, the professional experience reading contract language, and the organizational system. It made sense. What I did not anticipate, or perhaps I anticipated it and did not give it sufficient weight, was how thoroughly my family would forget that arrangement once the wedding started to feel real and exciting and theirs. The first sign was small. About 4 months into planning, my mother started referring to vendor choices as our decisions in conversations with Claudia, without looping me in. The florist, a woman named Bev who ran a boutique studio called Tendril and who I had contracted for $14,200, changed the centerpiece design twice based on conversations she'd had with my mother, conversations that resulted in invoices sent to my email for approval without any prior notice to me. I approved them because the costs were within the agreed range and because the changes were genuinely nice. But I noticed the pattern. The second sign was the seating chart conversation, which happened about 6 weeks before the wedding. I was visiting my parents' house on a Saturday morning when my mother spread the draft chart across the dining room table. The family tables, the front tables, the ones closest to the head table where Claudia and Preston would sit, were laid out, and I looked for my name. I was at table 6. The family tables were 1 through 4. "Mom," I said, "where am I?" "Table 6 is lovely," she said, without looking up. "It's right by the windows." "Who's at table 2? "Preston's cousins and his Aunt Vivian. She's flying in from Phoenix." A pause. We wanted to show the Harlow family, Roland and Miriam's side, that were making everyone feel welcomed. I noted that. I did not escalate. I told myself it was a seating chart and not a referendum on my value, and I went home and updated the vendor payment schedule for the following month. The third sign was the one that crystallized everything. It came 7 days before the wedding on a Thursday evening, in the form of a phone call from my mother. "Renata," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it with an open heart." I set down what I was doing. "We've made a change to the guest list. Preston's Aunt Vivian is bringing her partner. We didn't know until last week, and we needed to create a seat. We looked at where we could make an adjustment, and we've moved your +1 to accommodate them." My +1 was a colleague named Marcus, whom I had formally added to the guest count 8 months earlier and who had already RSVP'd and arranged to take the day off work. "You gave away Marcus's seat," I said. "It's not personal. It's logistics. We talked about it as a family." Who is the family in that sentence?
Renata.
It's politics.
You know how it is.
The Harlows are important to Preston's family, and we want to make Vivian feel.
Mom.
You gave away my guest seat. I know it's frustrating. She said this in the tone that means, this conversation is over. Your dad wants to say something. There was a shuffle, and then my father's voice. Just be gracious about it, Renata. This is your sister's day. One seat isn't worth a conflict. I was quiet for a moment. There was something in my chest that tightened, something that pressed against my ribs from the inside and sat there, solid and still, while I listened to my father explain graciousness to me. "Okay," I said. "That's our girl," he said. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a while. I looked at the master ledger open on my laptop. $63,000.
14 vendor contact.
My name on every line of every contract, with cancellation policies I had negotiated myself because that is what I do, and because I had known, somewhere in the professional part of my brain, that you always negotiate the cancellation terms. I called Marcus and told him the seat had been given away due to a family change. He was understanding. He's a good person. I apologized. He said it wasn't my fault. I thanked him and hung up, and then I was quiet again for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what I decided in that silence. I did not decide to burn anything down out of anger. That is not who I am, and it was not what Dorothea's money was meant for. What I decided was this. I was going to attend the wedding. I was going to be present, in the room, at whatever table they had assigned me to. I was going to watch what happened. And I was going to let the ledger exist in the world, exactly as it was, and trust that the world would find a way to read it. The Wednesday before the wedding, I had my final check-in call with Lorraine Chu, the coordinator at Harlow Hall. Lorraine was meticulous, warm, and had the organizational instincts of someone who had managed several hundred events and had long since learned that the chaos always comes from whoever holds the contracts, because that person is the one the vendors are legally obligated to. She had my cell number in her system as the primary contact for every booking. We went through the timeline. Everything was confirmed. Every balance had been paid. "You're all set, Renata," she said. "I'll have the master ledger printed and at the coordinator's desk as a reference copy. Standard practice for events of this scale." "Great," I said. "Thank you, Lorraine." "Of course. See you Saturday." I should have felt relieved.
I did, in a way.
But the more significant thing I felt was a particular kind of stillness, the kind that comes not from emptiness but from the sense that all the moving parts have locked into place and now all you can do is show up and watch the mechanism run. Thursday passed. Friday, the rehearsal dinner, which my parents hosted at a restaurant in the city and which I attended, and which was pleasant and unremarkable. Claudia was luminous. Preston's family was polite. Roland shook my hand and said, "Nice to meet you." Miriam smiled and asked if I was the older daughter, and I said yes, and she said lovely and moved on. I ate my dinner. I drove home. I slept. Saturday came overcast and then cleared by 10 in the morning, the way October days sometimes do in Ohio, a little grudging about it, but ultimately relenting. I put on the dress I had bought, which was a deep sage green and which I had not shown anyone in advance, because no one had asked. I drove the 40 minutes to Harlow Hall. Harlow Hall is a restored 1890s estate on 11 acres, with a main hall that seats 250 and a wraparound stone terrace that looks over a landscape of old oaks and manicured grass. It is genuinely a beautiful place. I had walked through it twice during the site visit and the vendor coordination meeting, and I had thought both times that it was exactly the kind of place that makes a wedding feel like an occasion. I was glad Claudia was having it there. I arrived at 11:30, 2 hours before the ceremony. I found the coordinator's desk in the main entrance hall, where a young assistant named Theo confirmed my name and handed me a small envelope with my table card. Table 6. I looked at it. Then I found the window table and sat down and watched the room fill. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock in the hall's interior, with the chairs arranged in a long sweep of ivory and greenery that Bev from Tendril had assembled with real artistry. I sat in the general guest section, toward the back half of the room. Preston stood at the front and went still in the way that men sometimes go still when they see the person they love walking toward them, and whatever else I want to say about this story, I want to be clear that the moment was genuinely moving. Claudia was beautiful. The string quartet played something low and sweet. My mother was crying in the front row. My father had his hand over hers. I watched all of it and felt something that I don't have a precise name for. It wasn't bitterness, exactly, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was more like the feeling of standing outside a window of a warm room and understanding, clearly and without drama, that the glass is there. The reception began at 4. The room had been transformed while guests were shuttled through a cocktail hour on the stone terrace. The chairs cleared, the round tables dressed, the centerpieces from Bev's studio distributed in arrangements of cream and burnished gold that caught the late afternoon light through the tall windows. It was, I will say again, beautiful. I had helped make it beautiful. I walked to table 6, which was by the eastern windows, and I found my place card, and I sat. The people at my table were genuinely nice. A couple from Preston's college years, a younger cousin of Claudia's on my mother's side, and 2 women from the nonprofit where Claudia had briefly volunteered. We talked about the ceremony, the venue, the food, which was excellent. The caterer, a firm called Provision and Company, had done a composed first course of roasted beet and whipped cheese that was, objectively, very good. I had approved the final menu in writing in March. The front tables, I could see from where I was seated, were arranged around the head table. Table 1 was Preston's immediate family, Roland and Miriam, his brother and sister-in-law, and his grandmother, a small woman in a dove-gray dress who sat very upright and ate with efficient, decisive movements. Table 2 was the Harlow extended family, including Aunt Vivian and her partner, who had arrived from Phoenix and who were, by all visible accounts, perfectly pleasant, and entirely worth neither the drama nor the seat reassignment that had been made in their honor. My parents were at table 3. They had not come to check on me during cocktail hour. They had not looked for me in particular during the ceremony seating. My mother had waved from across the terrace when she spotted me, and I had waved back, and that had been the extent of it. I understood. They were performing substantiality for Roland and Miriam, and that performance did not require me in the foreground. I ate my first course. I made conversation. I watched my sister move through the room, stopping at each table, glowing, holding Preston's hand with the specific looseness of someone who has arrived exactly where they intended to. I was glad for her. That is a true statement. Whatever happened with the seat, whatever happened with table 6 and the seating chart conversation and the phone call the Thursday before, I was glad that Claudia was happy. I kept that thought in the front of my mind like a smooth stone you hold to keep your hands occupied. Speeches were at 6. Preston's best man spoke first, then Claudia's maid of honor, a friend from graduate school named Priya, whose speech was warm and funny and made the room laugh twice. Then my mother spoke. She had prepared remarks on index cards that she read with the careful attention of someone who is not entirely comfortable speaking publicly, but who takes the responsibility seriously. She said she was proud of the woman Claudia had become. She said Roland and Miriam were gaining a daughter. She said this family was built on love and loyalty. I held my water glass. My father did not speak, but he raised his glass at the end of my mother's toast and caught my eye across the room, and for a moment I thought he might acknowledge something, some small nod to the fact that I existed and had contributed and was sitting at table 6 by a window, but he just smiled the general smile of a man at his younger daughter's wedding and turned back to the head table. The main course arrived. I ate. The light through the eastern windows moved from gold to amber to something dimmer as the sun dropped. The string quartet had given way to a DJ set up at the far end of the hall. The dance floor filled. And then at approximately 7:15 something happened. I want to describe it carefully because the sequence matters. Lorraine Chu, the Harlow Hall coordinator, came through the side door of the reception hall carrying a clipboard. She had been invisible until this point, doing what good coordinators do, running the event from the infrastructure rather than the visible surface. She moved across the room with the specific purposefulness of someone who has a question that needs answering, and she made her way to the head table. I saw her bend down and speak to Preston. Preston looked briefly uncertain and turned to his mother. Miriam leaned in, listened, and then her expression shifted, not to alarm, exactly, but to the particular attention of someone whose sense of order has been mildly disturbed. Lorraine straightened. She looked across the room. I watched her eyes find me at table 6. She walked toward me. Something went very still in my chest. "Renata?" she said, when she reached me. "Yes," I said. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. There's a small discrepancy in the photography balance, and I want to make sure it gets resolved tonight rather than rolling to next week. You're the primary on the photography contract." "I am," I said. "Could you come with me for just a moment? I have the ledger at the coordinator's desk, and I want to confirm a line item. It'll take 5 minutes." "Of course," I said. I set my napkin on the table. I stood. Here is what I did not know and could not have planned. Roland and Miriam Harlow had left their table during the later part of the main course to stretch. Miriam had mentioned to Preston's brother that her back was bothering her, and had wandered to the edge of the dance floor near the entrance corridor, where they were standing with drinks in hand and talking quietly when Lorraine and I came through. Lorraine was carrying the printed ledger, 63 pages, tabbed by vendor, because she had pulled it from the desk before coming to find me, and she had it tucked under her arm with the cover sheet visible. My mother was also there. I had not expected this. She had stepped away from table 3, apparently looking for the restroom, and had paused in the corridor when she saw the Harlows standing there, because she had been performing substantial for them all day and could not pass them without a word. So she was standing, in her mother-of-the-bride dress, making small talk with Roland, when Lorraine and I walked through. Lorraine set the ledger on the small side table near the coordinator's desk alcove, which was technically a private space, but which was partitioned by a low half-wall that left the corridor entirely open. She flipped to the photography tab with the ease of someone who has handled this document for months.
Here we go, she said.
The balance on the photography contract is listed as $3,100 due at delivery of the final gallery. The photographer, Leo at Aperture and Grace, says his records show it was due 30 days post-event. Can you confirm which is correct? My contract specifies 30 days post-event, I said. Leo is correct. Perfect. Let me just make a note here. She opened the ledger to the cover page and wrote something, and then she looked up at the section behind us, where my mother and the Harlows had gone quiet. I became aware of them as I heard my mother's voice, slightly too careful, slightly too calibrated. Is that the event file? Lorraine looked up. She has, I think, done this long enough that she reads rooms quickly. Yes, she said pleasantly. The master ledger for the event. We keep one on file for any coordination questions during the reception. The master ledger, Miriam said. She said it with a quality of interest I can only describe as precise. And this is Lorraine, is it? Who is the primary contact for the event? Lorraine looked at the cover page. Renata Vasquez, she said. Ms. Vasquez is the primary on all vendor contracts. Venue, catering, florals, photography, and ceremony music. She glanced at the total line at the bottom of the cover sheet, which was visible because it was in a larger font for easy reference. $63,420 in total bookings. The corridor was not loud. The music from the hall was a low current behind us, and the voices of 200 guests were a warm blur. But right there, in the alcove by the coordinator's desk, there was a particular quality of silence. My mother's face had gone pale in the way that happens when the blood just drops, a real physical thing, not a figure of speech. Her hand, which had been resting on the ledge of the half-wall, went still. Roland Harlow looked at me. He looked at the ledger. He looked back at me. You manage the contracts for the event, he said. Yes, I said. I'm a contract compliance analyst. It made the most sense logistically. All of them. All of them. Miriam looked at my mother. There was something in that look, not unkind exactly, but the assessing quality that Miriam carried everywhere turned now on a very specific question. Patrice, Miriam said my mother's name. I didn't realize Renata was the one managing the event arrangements. My mother's mouth opened and then closed.
Yes.
She helped with the logistics.
A pause.
She's very organized. She funded $63,000 in vendor contracts, Roland said. Not accusatory, just precisely factual, the way people who come from money sometimes state numbers. Like confirmation of something they'd suspected. Lorraine, to her credit, simply stood and let the conversation happen. She did not add to it or retreat from it. She was a professional. I said nothing. I looked at my mother. I looked at her the way you look at someone you have known your entire life and are seeing, in one very specific moment, from a very accurate distance. What I noticed. Her shoulders had come up slightly, the way shoulders do when you are recalibrating a narrative you have been running for a long time, and the facts have just declined to cooperate. What I noticed. Roland Harlow had turned fully toward me now, not toward her. What I noticed. Miriam was looking at me with the particular attention she reserved, I had seen all evening, for things that she found genuinely worth considering. Well, Roland said, and he held out his hand to me. Then thank you. This has been a genuinely beautiful event. I shook it. I'm glad, I said. It should be. My sister deserves it.
That was all I said.
I did not add anything. I did not look at my mother for her reaction. I thanked Lorraine, confirmed the photography note, and walked back to table 6. I want to tell you what happened next because it happened in increments, the way things actually happen when social weight shifts in a room. The first thing was that Roland and Miriam returned to table 1, and I watched from table 6 as Roland said something to his wife, and his wife said something back, and then both of them looked across the room, briefly, just a glance, at my table. Then they looked at the head table. Then they went back to their conversation. The second thing was that my mother returned to table 3, and about 3 minutes after she sat down, she leaned over to my father and said something. My father's posture changed. He turned and looked across the room toward the corridor. Then he turned back.
He did not look at me.
The third thing was that Preston's grandmother, The small woman in the dove-gray dress who ate with decisive movements, caught my eye across the room, raised her glass very slightly, and nodded once. I have thought about that nod many times since. It was one of those moments that takes 2 seconds and contains something you carry for years. The fourth thing was that Miriam Harlow came to table 6 during the dessert course. She sat in the empty seat beside me. There were empty seats at table 6 because I had no +1, and she said, without any preamble, "The florals are extraordinary. Are you the one who selected the studio?" I contracted with them, yes. The florist is named Bev. She's very talented.
She is.
I'd like her information if you're willing. I gave her Bev's contact card from my wallet because I carried one from each vendor as a practical matter. Miriam took it, looked at it, put it in her small evening bag. Then she said, "Your sister is very lucky, you know." I said, "I know." She nodded and went back to table 1. My father found me at the end of the evening, near the exit, as the guests were beginning to filter out. He put his hand on my arm in the way that fathers do when they are trying to close a conversation they should have opened differently. "That was something," he said. I waited. "Renata." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know. I knew you were handling the contracts, but I didn't think about how it would look, what it meant." "You told me to be gracious," I said. "I did." A pause. I think I should have said something different. I looked at him. He was not a bad man. That is the truth I keep coming back to. He was a man who had spent a long time not looking carefully at the full picture, and the full picture had turned out to be larger than he'd estimated. "I was gracious," I said. "And I'll keep being gracious. But I think we should talk. All of us. Not tonight. But we should talk." He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Renata." I drove home. I changed out of my sage green dress. I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with the ledger closed and the spreadsheet minimized, and I thought about Dorothea, who had known something about the weight of paper and the patience required to let it speak for itself. For when your judgment matters most. The calls started Sunday morning. My mother called at 9:15. She said she wanted to talk. I told her I was available Tuesday evening and I would come to their house. She said okay. She called again at 11. I let it go to voicemail. She said she just wanted to make sure I wasn't upset. I was not upset. I was drinking coffee and reading a book. My sister called Sunday afternoon from her honeymoon hotel. "Rennie," she said, "I need you to know, I didn't know Mom gave away Marcus's seat until the night before the wedding." I believed her. Claudia is not calculating. She is the one who has been calculated around, the same as I have, just in the opposite direction. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have pushed back." "You were getting married," I said. "It's okay." "It's not okay," she said. "Rennie, Roland and Miriam, they've been talking about you all morning. Miriam apparently told Preston's grandmother you were the one who put the whole wedding together, and you were seated at table 6. "Table 6 was nice," I said. "Good windows." There was a pause, and then Claudia laughed, a real laugh, short and a little helpless, and I laughed too, and for a moment it was just the two of us the way we used to be before the seating charts and the politics and the in-law optics. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," I said. "Go enjoy your honeymoon." Miriam Harlow called me on Monday. I did not expect this. She had gotten my number from the Ledger contact sheet. She asked if I would be willing to consult on a corporate event her company was planning for early spring, a client appreciation dinner for one of their commercial property groups, projected budget around $40,000. She said Roland and she had discussed it on Sunday and both agreed I was, and she used this specific word, the obvious choice. I said I would be happy to discuss it and that she could email me to schedule a call. She emailed me that afternoon. Here's the thing about quiet people and documentation. It is not a revenge strategy. It was never a revenge strategy. I built the ledger because building ledgers is what I do, and I maintained the contracts because maintaining contracts protects everyone in the arrangement, including my sister and her wedding and the vendors who depend on clear agreements to do their jobs well. The ledger existing was not a plan. The ledger existing was just the consequence of doing things correctly. What I learned from Dorothea, From 31 years of being a county clerk who had seen enough human drama to understand that people rewrite their own histories constantly, is that paper does not rewrite itself. It sits there, and it waits. And when the room is ready to read it, it says exactly what it has always said. My family had spent 11 months treating my role as logistical background, necessary, utilitarian, invisible. The ledger didn't argue with that. It just existed, in Lorraine's hands, in a corridor in Harlow Hall, and allowed the room to do the math. That's my story. A spreadsheet, a florist's business card, and a window table by the eastern wall. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else held the spotlight, if you've ever been gracious when you had every right not to be, I want to know, what was the moment you decided to let the truth speak for itself? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.